Hey guys, this is Brian. Sam from The Blind Life challenged all of his followers, his VIPs, to make their own My Vision story. So this is it. I'm Brian, 53 years old, live in outside Orlando, Florida, and born and raised. And I have stargardt's disease. When I was about 12 years old, I was in a teacher of mine, Sister Catherine Labouré, noticed that I was looking at the books a little bit closer than the other kids, that I was squinting, trying to read the blackboard, etc. So she suggested to my family that we go to an optometrist. So a good friend of our family's is an optometrist in town, so went to him, and we were all expecting me to get a prescription and be done with it. My dad wears glasses. It's pretty common in our family, especially my dad's side. And the optometrist said, "You know what? There's something else going on here. You need to go to an ophthalmologist." So went through an ophthalmologist, and again, he's like, "I don't know what's going on." He's like, "But we need you to see a specialist." So at the time, there weren't any specialists. This was mid-70s in Orlando. There weren't any, specialists that knew how to diagnosed advanced eye diseases. So ended up going to University of South Florida in Tampa, and had a bunch of tests. They tested me for being colorblind, and of course, those of you with Stargardt's disease know that those tests don't work on us. I see colors, but according to them, I couldn't see anything, and whatever. Still the same. But then they did an EEG, where they stick it's like a glorified contact lens. It's kind of bubbly, leads coming out of it, and you get to stare at dots for a long time. And it wasn't painful, but gosh, it took forever. Then they did, the typical, this is before they could easily take photos of the eye. So they had to do a lot of basically dilate my eyes, and then the ophthalmologist would have big giant magnifying glasses with lights on them and basically stare at the back of my eye. For those of you in the SD and VIP world, it's eye torture, light torture. So that was tough. Then they still weren't sure. They wanted, I think at this, I was young. I was 12 years old at the time, 13, and they wanted an extra diagnosis, so I went to Bascom Palmer Institute in Miami. I still go there now, and they're the ones who finally came up with the diagnosis of Stargardt's disease. Stargardt's is a genetic form. It's also called juvenile macular degeneration, and it's a degenerative disease of the retina, the central vision of the macula. And yeah, so that was, it was fun being 13, going through all the normal 13-year-old stuff, and having this diagnosis. So the school I went to a Catholic high school, Central Florida. You can probably figure out which one that is. And at the time, they were pretty good, but by the end of my sophomore year, they came to my family and I, and they're like, we can't help Brian. They didn't have the staffing. They didn't have the ability to help me with my tests, with getting large print books, with getting books on tape, with really anything. So begrudgingly, I left the friends and family and school that I'd known for almost 10 years to go to a public high school. Now, just so you guys know, young people might not know this, there were no black and white copies back then. In schools, you had these mimeograph, which is basically a dark blue print, purple print on a light purple paper. So those are colors that I can't see well, and the contrast is just it was painstaking. So there weren't any, magnifiers were not a thing, not common. There were no tablets, there were no computers. So when I went to I went to Edgewater High School in Orlando, and it was like the magnet for all the low vision students in Central Florida in Orange County. So I was there with about 6 kids, and it was cool because we could all relate to each other, and we all had very different backgrounds from different parts of the county, and it was great to have that common bond. And we had this amazing teacher, and basically she would get our tests in advance for us. She would take them and either hand write them in big, giant, bold um, script. Sometimes she was just able to trace over them if it was math or something like that. And it was really because of her that I got successfully through high school. It eliminated a lot of the angst. When you can't read the blackboard, when you can't read overhead projections, when you can't read your textbook. At the time, I mean, I was at 20, 100, 2120, something like that in high school. So I could, with my reading glasses, read normal text, but it was a struggle. It's slow. Um, the silver lining of having stargardts and having low vision is that I realized that I didn't want to just sit at home and live on disability. I wanted, to explore the world. I wanted to do a lot of things. I wasn't the best student at Bishop Moore, but when I got to Edgewater, I really got motivated because I wanted to go to college. I wanted to go to a good college. I wanted to make something of myself and make a living for myself that was not dependent on my vision. Because quite frankly, if I hadn't had low vision, I probably would have gone to the military or police or more than likely fire department. I think I probably would have gone to be a fireman. But anyhow, so it kind of forced me to go to college. And I actually fell in love with architecture. I'm not an architect, spoiler, but I fell in love with architecture. I think that when you know that you may lose your vision, you start to really pay attention to what you can see, and you appreciate the beauty and the craftsmanship of it. So I fell in love with architecture and design. I think I had a knack for it, and so that was my focus. So I went from the bottom 20% of my class my freshman and sophomore year to the top 5%. I really drove myself. Worked hard in school. It was a lot of work having to those large print books were horrible. I'll never forget. I took a typing class. My father suggested it because he's like, personal computers are coming around, and he said, the days of having a secretary to type your things are gone. So he suggested take a typing class, and these typing textbooks were they were a foot wide and 2 feet long, and the way you had to take typing tests at the time is you had to type, pages. They'd say, open to page 32, type that page. Well, I needed a whole entire desk just for my book, and I still couldn't read it well. So I was never fast by doing it that way, by transposing, but I am a pretty quick typist, and I still am. But anyhow, so I went to architecture school, and I actually did pretty well in the architecture class. I had all A's, 1 or 2 B's in my architecture studies. I had to move away from home, and they really didn't have any resources for me there. So architecture itself was especially drafting classes were real difficult. A typical drafting class at the time, this is before CADs really were around. We didn't have any CADs at art school. You would open your textbook, and there would be a floor plan or elevation or something, and you would have to transpose it from 1/32 scale to 1/4 inch scale on paper. And that was tiny because the measurements on these things, you're talking about, walls that are a 1/16 of an inch thick, having to measure that, and it was a nightmare. I got through it. I worked hard, but at the end of about my second year, I realized that the technology wasn't there for me to be successful in my graduate studies and in the rest of my bachelor studies. So, and I was homesick. Moved back to Orlando and went to UCF. And they had an amazing, at the time it was called Department of Handicap Services, and they had this amazing, I wouldn't call it teacher, but administrator, and she got me anything I needed. If I needed large print books, she could get them, books on tape, which I was never successful with. I don't know about you guys, but I always fell asleep. And what was key at the time is that I got to register for classes with like the athletes. So I was first up for any class I wanted, so I could build my schedule the way I wanted it, which was great. I wouldn't schedule any classes before 10, no light classes. So basically all my classes were between 10 and 6, and it was great. No Saturday classes. And I lived on campus in the dorms. Because of my low vision, my disability, I got free room and board, which was great. It helped ease the pain because I had to pay for college all by myself. So I made it through with Pell Grants. I did have 1 or 2 loans, but nothing major. When I was there, I actually fell in love with political science, with international relations. And that requires a ton of reading. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the intellectual challenge of figuring out international law and why people do things, political systems. It was fun. But I knew at the time that I had flirted with the idea of trying to go into government service, to State Department or intelligence. But that didn't work out. I wanted to travel, but I didn't want to travel in a bulletproof van. So when I was at UCF, I started helping plan homecoming and things like that for the school. And I realized I really enjoyed the challenge of planning events, logistics, moving large amounts of people from A to B, vehicles A to B. My favorite thing in the world was to coordinate the homecoming parade. So when I got out of school, I decided, you know what, I want to do event planning for a living. So I was very lucky that got a job with a company, no longer exists, called Safaris. And it was, they had an office in Orlando, but they were based all over the world. So it's great. So I got to work with some amazing people. And at the time, I could still read, print. It was close. I had to hold it really close to my face. I could read manifests and flow sheets and things like that. And I've been so blessed with the people that I've worked with and worked for, that they have given me the tools I needed. And at the time, it was just like, okay, I need a larger monitor for my computer. Can we please make sure that, this is in the time of ink cartridges and printers, that if they got low, it got really, really gray instead of black. So they were made sure that whenever I printed something, that it was nice black ink. I used to create a lot of my own forms and workflow sheets, and I would create them in such a way that I could read them. And my staff didn't mind that, it was in, 14-point bold font. So that's cool. But, gosh, I had a blast. I mean, I'm so blessed to, again, work with amazing people that understood my disability, my stargardts, and just let me make it happen. So I used to spend a lot of money on taxis. This is way before Uber. But I figured, you know what, I'm not making a car payment. I'm not paying insurance. So I just need to suck it up and do it. And I would try to work it out. If, I was going to a meeting, I would carpool. And for events offsite, I would make sure that, I'd some of my crew I got really close to, and I'd say, hey, can you just pick me up on the way to the show? So that all worked out. And because of that, I actually got to travel the world. Not to be egotistical, but I'm really good at what I do. And I have been on the planning teams for, gosh, 4 Olympics. Sorry. Sorry about that. I've been on the planning teams for a couple Olympics. Not for the events themselves, but for sponsor hospitality. But it's still moving people. I've managed moving, 40,000 people from A to B, 100 coaches, motor coaches. And it's, again, my employers always looked at my abilities, not at my disabilities. So anyhow, so I've traveled all over the world. One of the companies I worked for, which is kind of funny, was a group tour company out of the Chicago area. And they had these high-end group travel events for groups all over the world. And I used to work for them, which was great. But, they would throw me in Hong Kong with the group, and I'd have to lead them around. So the blessing with Stargardt's disease is that unless you have to read something in front of somebody, they have no idea that I have a visual impairment. So I can fake it pretty well. I don't use a cane. I've never had to. That day may come. I don't know. But I don't need a cane. I've maneuvered my world pretty easily without it. But yeah, so I used to lead tour groups all over the world. Europe, Asia, Australia. It's been fun. I've gotten to see a lot of amazing things, and I'm so happy. So now I'm 53. I'm married. I have one amazing 15-year-old daughter. They are I don't think my daughter's. She knows that I have a visual problem, but I think she forgets it a lot because there are times where I'll have to ask her, it's like, hey, can you read this menu for me? And she'll be like, what? Why? So, anyhow, so I could go on and on and on, but I think I've never viewed myself, I've never labeled myself as blind. It's just part of who I am. Nobody's perfect. Everybody's got something, and we all do the best with what we can. And like I said, I've had an amazing life. I have an amazing home, amazing family. Right now I work as an event producer for a local venue. So I don't travel anymore. I got tired of traveling just because I didn't want to be away from home. I used to do, most of my work was international, so if a client was sending me to Europe, they'd want to keep me in Europe as long as they could without flying me home. So a 2-week event in Dublin would end up being a 6-week tour where I would go, Ireland, then I'd hop out to France, and then I'd go to Italy. It sounds obnoxious, but it's tiring, it's lonely, and I just miss being home. I may start traveling again. My daughter's will be going to college in a couple of years, so I may start traveling again because I do miss it. I miss seeing the world. But anyhow, so that's my vision story. It's long. If you guys hung out with me the whole time, appreciate it. I'm planning on actually building this YouTube page. If you notice, my tagline is Blind Cyclist. One of my passions, and I'm not going to talk about this in this video, is cycling. I was a competitive cyclist, never very good. I never won anything, but I used to say that I was the worst cyclist on the best amateur race team in the state of Florida. And I used to mix it up pretty good. And so now I'm back on the bike, but it's insight on a trainer, and I'll be actually doing most of my videos on the trainer from now on. So anyhow, thanks again for watching, and take care.